I ended up working on the background anyway, as it wasn't too much work in the end. I want to add some other animated features to the intro, but we're definitely getting there now. The subject for today's video is a member of Seiko's Presage range, in particular the Cocktail Time series of watches, namely the Mojito. I thought this would be a good watch to end the year on, as its colours are quite festive. Before we begin, I want to preface this with a huge slice of bias. My wife bought me this watch as a 10th anniversary present, so straight away it means a lot to me. When it comes to giving and receiving gifts, I often think that a gift that someone uses on a regular basis is always the best kind of present. It doesn't matter how big or small. Sometimes, no matter how thoughtful you are, you just miss the mark for whatever reason. This is definitely not one of those occasions though. The first thing that you'll notice is that the watch is not on its original strap. That's entirely intentional. The original strap is shiny brown leather. It's not that it's a poor strap, I just don't think it suits the watch. I've learnt from experience though that I'm not great at choosing straps myself. I often end up going for compromises and choosing cheaper options that just don't suit as well as I thought when browsing online. So with the Mojito and other future acquisitions, I've swapped to using Google Images for help. That's where I found this colour matched NATO strap from WatchGecko. I think they've discontinued the exact strap as this was over a year ago, but the range is still available and some match with other cocktail range models if this is a style that you like. You can see some signs of wear and tear on mine, but I've worn this watch a fair bit, so that's to be expected. As with every watch I'm featuring on the channel, outside of the Keep or Sell series, this is from my personal collection. Maybe the channel logo and the intro are a dead giveaway, but green is by far and away my favourite colour. I've lived in England my entire life and have no Scottish heritage at all, but I was football mad as a kid and remember asking my parents at a very young age for a Celtic shirt. Not because I was a fan, just because it was green. So the dial colour on the Mojito is already a strong selling point for me. What really sets it apart though is the guilloche style dial. Now to be clear, this is not a hand lathe dial for an RRP of £400. But alongside other members of the Cocktail Time and wider Presage range from Seiko, it does represent some of the most affordable dial work for the budget. I'm not normally a fan of gold, but the warm tones it brings to the dial through the numerals and indices do give a certain feeling of richness to the watch. I do think it might actually benefit from the case also being gold in terms of visual balance. It does seem a little odd for them not to be fully colour matched, when all of the other elements of the dial have been. This also seems to be a bit of an inconsistency among the range in general, with most of the models being fully colour matched alongside a couple of other outliers. The Star Bar limited edition version of the watch, inspired by the Huju cocktail, demonstrates what could have been. This is actually a really interesting model, where the textured dial is designed to reflect the rice fields which grow a key ingredient in the cocktail. The thread that runs through the design of all of these watches is that they're all inspired by a signature cocktail, with many traditional Japanese variants on drinks available. Japan is famous for its after-work drinking culture, so while it might initially seem like an odd inspiration for a watch dial, when you connect all of the moving parts here, it does make sense. Let's look at the dial of the Mojito itself. The way it catches light while moving is the main appeal here. The sunburst effects leaves light bouncing off all the different surfaces and it's very visually arresting. It puts me in mind of reptile skin, especially towards the outer boundaries of the dial. The eye can often trick you into seeing flower petals and other geometric shapes when the watch is moving. It's a very deep and rich colour of green, and really I think they're aiming to recreate the segmented effect that you might get on a lime added to the cocktail. At any rate, if you saw the watch, the drink isn't necessarily the first place your mind might go. But it's a nice name and concept nonetheless. I have to say, on a personal note, and quite a tragic one at that, I'm actually allergic to alcohol. So the actual number of mojitos I've consumed is precisely 0. Getting away from that cripplingly depressing fact, let's look at the sizing. At 38.5mm, this watch sits in the absolute sweet spot of my 36 to 40mm target range. The majority of that size is taken up by the dial, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Having the watch on a NATO strap clearly adds a little height to it. This particular strap is very thin and not double banded, so the effect is not as bad as other straps I've featured on the channel. Watch Crunch released a video recently on zero passing with a NATO strap to avoid the effect altogether. That is something I've considered with this watch, especially as it has an exhibition case back and a very neatly finished movement that the NATO covers up. However, the main appeal of a NATO for me is the same as a fitted bracelet. It covers up the gaps at the lugs, and to me that aesthetic is worth more than a little extra thickness as a trade-off. You'll notice on my channel that there are very few watches that have standard straps on them, and that isn't by accident. I've mentioned previously that sword hands are my favourite handset. The ones that feature on the Mojito match the style of the dial and are complemented by a needle style second hand that adds to the classy aesthetic of the piece. The Mojito is clearly a dress watch and fits comfortably under a cuff at 11.8mm thick, which sounds like a fair bit, but there is a heavily domed hardlex crystal seriously bumping up that measurement. It is a shame not to get sapphire at this price point, but it does the job. The watch goes particularly well with colour matched formal wear, but I often find myself wearing this at weekends and evenings when I'm actually spending time with my wife. In fairness, green is not that common in terms of formal dress, and it's only my personal preference that means I own so much of the colour. The NATO strap it's on gives it a far more casual feel, and I own plenty of green clothes for casual wear, so it's easy to match up with a t-shirt for me. The Mojito comes with a 4R35 automatic movement, with a fairly standard 41-hour power reserve. It features hacking and hand winding, as well as 50 meters of water resistance. There's no screw down crown here. On a dress watch, that makes sense. And in the case of the Mojito, it's finished with a gold effect rotor to match the front of the watch. As you can see from these shots, it's certainly worthy enough of having an exhibition case back. It's a rock solid movement and a cornerstone of the bottom end of Seiko's mid-range models. It also features in some Pro Specs and Paddy rated divers. To finish, let's explore the rest of the range. If you like the Mojito but green isn't your style, the red of the Negroni and the blue of the old watch might be avenues you want to explore. Beyond that, the rest of the Presage cocktail time range offers a different set of textured dials. I won't be able to cover them all here, but I will highlight a few examples and personal favourites. The most common dial design is an expanding radial pattern. These models come without numerals on the dial, but with sharper indices and a few smaller feminine models coming in at 33.8mm. I think it's a real shame that these aren't unisex and coming in at least 36mm, because the Bellini is actually my favourite watch from the cocktail time range. It puts me in mind of the Shunbun from Grand Seiko, which would be one of my Grail watches. Now if you put them side by side, clearly one is on a completely different level to the other, but it's also a fraction of the cost, with the Bellini coming in at an RRP of £429 and the Shunbun coming in at £24,350. So if it could give me a good chunk of the aesthetic for a fraction of the price, I'd definitely bite the bullet on this if I had smaller wrists or they made a larger size. At the top end of the range, there are a couple of models that come with power indicators instead of date functions. A power indicator is a complication I don't yet have in my collection, so I am interested in these, but with dials like this, I think anything that's going to take away focus is probably not the right call. I think I'd actually prefer the Mojito without a date complication for that exact reason. While there are some models that come without date complications, instead they feature open heart style balance wheels, which again is a feature I quite like on its own, but all it actually does is take away dial space. When the dial is your unique selling point, it just doesn't feel right to take away from it for me. Finally, there are also a series of watches featuring layers of overlapping circles as the design, each intersecting with each other over and over again to form a mesmerising pattern across the dial. My picks here would be the Irish Coffee and the Black Velvet versions. Of the two, I think the completely colour matched black model is a very interesting proposition that definitely has more of a streetwear feel to it than the other watches in the collection. Does the Cocktail Time collection do it for you? I'm always on the lookout for interesting dials, so if you have any suggestions, I'd be more than happy to hear them in the comments. I have a couple of keep or sell videos in the new year focusing on a meteorite dial and an aventurine dial that I've purchased. Stay tuned for those. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've liked what you've seen, please like and subscribe. Enjoy the holiday season, and I'll be back to uploading in the new year.